We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. So, Alessandra, thank you for joining us. Why don't you tell us about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Lisa, for having me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an author as of a couple months ago, and I live in Italy.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I live in Italy, and formerly I was living in New York and pursuing a career in business in the insurance and financial industries. I am now a meditation guide as well as working on some other business projects. So bringing it back into the business world after these 2 years of spiritual exploration. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Nice,
Live in
nice.
Italy. I'm not
Well,
sure if
I'm going to mention your book, and it's called A New Banana. I'll show it. And it's interesting. And I mentioned I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I did definitely flip through it, and I love the parts in it. And the thing that when we had our pre-podcast call, a lot of what you kind of focus on is relationships. And as I mentioned before we started the podcast, we could have many podcasts on relationships, just diving into all the different types of relationships and how to manage them. And it's a struggle, even as an adult, right?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, and if you think about it, it all leads back to relationships. Even when we're with ourselves, there's a relationship going on. So, and then if we think about, expanding it into the universe, everything is interconnected, so
Yes.
this, we're all interconnected. So at the end of the day, relativity and relationships with others, whether it's, other people or sides of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
is probably the entire landscape, to explore in this
Right.
life.
Right.
So,
Right. And I was thinking about this because for many years, what I didn't have was a relationship with myself. I was overtly focused on having relationships with others and trying to make those work. And I struggled for years. And I know the key part of that is because I didn't have a relationship with myself. Right.
You think you do, but you don't. You think
Or
what
at
you
least
have
not a
is what
healthy
is.
one.
Right, exactly. Like you don't actually factor it in as an actual relationship. And it was the same for me too. And so, nowadays I consider myself a best friend. So as
Yes.
if I were to think about another person, I'm always with myself. So I might as
Mm-hmm.
well enjoy that time that I'm spending with myself. And it took some time to get there, and it took a lot of nudges from the universe that that eventually lead you here, ideally sooner than later.
Right, right. Yeah, because the relationship I had with myself, I'm sitting here thinking about it as we're talking about it, was really unhealthy. I actually abused myself. And it was just because that's what I knew. The
Mhm.
voice in my head was not a friendly one. And I used to say that for years, the very thing that you said about being my own best friend. And I used to talk to other people about that. Excuse me. And honestly, I wasn't, but I didn't realize it,
Mhm.
and it goes back to the self-awareness and slowing down. And it was just maybe a year ago or so that I recognized one of the voices in my head. I mean, it just came from nowhere and it was abusive.
Mhm.
And the self-awareness made me realize, wait a minute, that's not okay. And I started to slow down and listen to those voices that were in my head.
Mhm. All of them, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had to slow down and start listening to the voices in my head and paying attention to what they were saying to me and deciding whether that was okay or not.
'Cause. Mhm. Mhm. And so, and, and, I think one of my favorite Rumi quotes, which I'm going to paraphrase, but what he says is, making friends, inviting at all of the sides of ourselves in
Oh,
as if
mm-hmm.
they were, a guest, and allowing them to live in that space with you. And I've taken it further even, um, during some ceremonies I've had, an exploration of different sides of me. And when fear or when anger, when sadness comes up, I actually, put that in practice and pretended I was having a dinner party with all of these parts of me.
Ah,
And what was fun is that eventually the anger and the awkward sides of me sort of like looked so weird that they left. So whoever was left was just happiness and joy and light and
nice.
love. And, so, at some point, I think ultimately these parts of us, they want to be acknowledged.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be acknowledged because there was a purpose for them in our lives,
True.
whether it took 10, 15, 20 years or less or more for us to learn the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Their role was fulfilled, and their
Mm-hmm.
role was to wake us up in some way. And,
Mm-hmm.
in whatever language we needed to hear it, however long it took, the process itself, so many other things we then learn that that serve us from there on out once we do develop this close relationship with ourselves, which is the key to all other relationships in the end.
Right, right. One of the I guess things that I would do to I guess when I would hear those voices that would come in, or if I thought of doing something that I wasn't sure about, is I would compare it. Would I talk to somebody else like this? Would I
Mhm.
treat somebody else
Exactly.
like this? Would I say this to somebody else, and would I say it like that? And that was an eye opener for me, I'm telling you. And I
Mhm.
realized, no, I would never talk to somebody else like that. Even in my anger, I wouldn't treat someone else
Right.
like that. So why am I doing that to myself? And it doesn't feel good, because if you stop and you think about it, if you listen to what's going on in your head, how does it make you feel?
Exactly. Exactly. And many, very often, what we also don't realize is some part of us is saying those things,
Mm-hmm.
but the majority of us is the voice is who's listening. So the
Oof.
voice that's talking is an accumulation of criticisms and judgments that our mind creates.
Mm-hmm.
But we're ultimately also the ones listening. And
Mm-hmm.
just like you said, if I were talking to a friend like that, no, that would be, I would end the friendship, like, for God's sakes. And I know
Mm-hmm.
exactly what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that is also really important is, if it does happen again in life, because every now and then we can fall into periods of, you know, difficulty or density. I mean, we're on it's a spiral. So sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, even mistakes we've made in the past reappear as a small test, and we can fall a little bit um, under the rug, or whatever the expression might be. And what's ultimately so important, keeping all of this in mind, is also not to judge your judgment.
Yep.
So um, it's one thing to be in that first layer of unawareness where this is all taking place, and you're just sort of, I guess, a victim of your own circumstance without realizing you're the one that can help yourself. And then, um, but beyond that, maybe you reach a level of like understanding, and you're like, great, now I'm enlightened. Now I know what it's like. Now I'm positive. Everything's going really, really well. And then you have a bad day and it happens, and then you're like, oh no, like, it's not all over. It's okay to still have a bad day. It's okay to have these thoughts go through us. And, it's just an opportunity um, for us to learn how to expand our own love for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so to not judge the judgment, I think, is one of the things that have come up in conversation with some people recently, that have shared with me their stories. So
Yeah, that is a big one, because it goes back to how you're treating yourself, how you're treating, and you wouldn't treat someone else like that, and giving yourself some grace, because when your child makes a mistake, or if your friend makes a mistake, you're not harsh on them like you would be on yourself. So you
Mm-hmm.
would give them grace and understanding. And one of the best little quotes that I love to hear, and I try to remind myself, because I can be judgmental just because of my background, is to be curious rather than judgmental.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's very powerful. That's
It's
very
hugely
powerful.
powerful. That takes you in a completely different direction, because being curious is not a bad thing, and it's not negative
Mm-hmm.
at
Mm-hmm.
all, right? And so,
Exactly.
yeah. And so what else, what do you recommend for self-care? Let's go down that. What are some of the things that you would recommend to start with for somebody who's possibly never started self-care, just becoming aware of it? What would you recommend?
Okay. So, well, we've definitely given a good introduction
Mm-hmm.
for someone who, wants to have some some understanding of the mind. So the mind, that's a daily continuous practice because we're constantly within, the four walls of our minds.
Yeah.
Um, I would say, of course, then we have the body. So the body is very, very important to keep healthy. So, um, for a long time before I discovered meditation, which is ultimately what connected all of my inner peace together. So meditation would be a great solution as well. It's as simple as doing a little bit of exercise every day, and bringing oxygen to our cellular bodies, and stretching, and understanding that when we're doing that, it's love as well, and love can can also result from being proud of ourselves, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes
Mm-hmm.
of exercise per day. Once again, if you don't do it, don't judge yourself. Be kind. Be okay with,
Right.
needed rest. It's all about honestly cultivating sort of like this like flowing relationship with yourself, and knowing when to be a little bit more discerning about when you should put some rules for yourself into place, like in a loving way, the way, a loving mother would, understanding that there's time for action and there's also time for kindness, because, I, so action can be going for exercise and, exerting a little bit, even if we normally would not. And that really helps clear the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation is also a nice practice to give us higher perspective and an insight into how our minds might work, and being able to rise above that, and also there's a space for laziness, and I don't
Yes.
I think a lot of so again, it's all about being kind to yourself, and laziness in the sense of it's the opposite of action. It's the receptive female energy of being able to um, allow creative insight to come and during play, and treating ourselves softly, and there's a place for all of that. Ultimately it comes down to bringing balance
Mm-hmm.
into your life and into yourself. And I guess if you can imagine, like, you just have all of these little cups and all of these drinks, one of them being meditation, one of them being working out, one of them being going to work, another, all of these little things. It's about, or how you treat yourself, how you treat others. It's about slowly you're pouring each little cup, and it's about finding that balance,
Right.
because um, there's no wrong way to reach a means end if you're implementing with good intention any of the tools that are available. Breath work,
Yeah.
I think whatever reaches you is not a coincidence. So these synchronicities of like healing practices that might come your way, try them out,
Mm-hmm.
because ultimately the practice itself that is introducing it's only half of that's the portal, but what you meet through that portal is always yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so um it's really like, as you said, a curious exploration without judgment into learning more and more about who you are. And when we take conscious action, when we decide, okay, I want to go on a hike tomorrow. I've never done it before. I'm really intimidated. But when we get through that, that creates like a great self-esteem. It creates a
Yes.
new, side, a neurofired pathway. I'm not a scientist, but it certainly creates like a little thumbnail in your
Confidence.
self-esteem and your confidence that's like, I did that. And
Hmm.
now nobody can take that experience away from you. And
Hmm.
now it becomes part of your identity. So you're constructing every day in the present something that is who you are because you've created it. So
Hmm.
it's it's just a mix of so many different things that are
Right.
glued together by our desire to have a good relationship with ourselves. Now, I got there very fast through meditation. So all of these things by themselves I had been doing throughout my life, but it wasn't until I figured out, I suppose in my case that was the lesson, I figured out how to stay still with
Mm.
myself. um because, and again, so many things all tie together, but ultimately, who are you when nobody's home? Who are you when you're not validating yourself externally, when you're
Hmm.
not with friends?
Yeah.
When you close the door, are you capable of actually being comfortable with that person? Do you, not only that, eventually you might want, it would be nice to get to a place where you enjoy it,
Hmm.
where you enjoy it so much that you're, anything else that is invited in is better or different. Not better, because of course we always want to be happy, but
Yes.
differently exciting.
Right.
So um, when I finally meditated, it just like everything clicked for me after a few different sessions, um, and developed this love within that had been clogged, with all of these other layers
Hmm.
that that come from our society and expectations and structures, and even well-intentioned people along the way that eventually form our choices in our path in life.
Hmm.
And the more we stray away from our inner core and what our soul is rooting for us, which is happiness, if we can't hear that voice any longer, we just are blindly living our lives and based
Hmm.
on all of these external factors. And so it wasn't until I finally found connection with that light within me, which happened when I was meditating, that all the layers came off. And then everything became much more simple and much more in the present
Mm.
and much more um, light as well. So it's all interconnected, essentially.
Hmm.
When we have that good relationship, when we defend it after we've found it, and we can anchor it and defend it, then there's of course destruction that comes along with it, because
Hmm.
the tower must crash in order for the solid foundation to appear.
Right.
So things may not always be unicorns and fairies and magic. It certainly is not meant to be in this duality that we exist in. Um, but it certainly makes things a lot more understandable. And when you have that awareness and that core anchored feeling inside that you have yourself no matter what is going on, and
Hmm.
you trust yourself and you are connected with your divine essence, because we ultimately are all beautifully imperfect, perfect beings. We
True.
came here to experience imperfection, but ultimately, deep down, if we strip it all away, I mean, it's all perfect. So
Hmm.
if you have that connection, then whether things go right or things go wrong, it's nothing against you. It's not another burden to carry. It's not you know, uh, it doesn't reflect who you are as a person just
Right.
because something isn't working out, or and someone else is thriving and you're surviving, or you didn't get the job, or whatever the situation could be.
Right.
And when you see it like that, that everything happens for you and not to you,
Right.
and
I was going to
and
say
you've
that.
got yourself, it's like, cool, so that didn't work out, how interesting. Exactly, like curious,
Hmm.
how
Hmm.
interesting that this seems to be flowing, let's keep it going. And
Hmm.
so not attached to outcome, and just completely in your center is really where you want to go. And there's so many ways to get there, which is why in the book I tackled it through so many different perspectives, because it's like you can have that aha moment, which is an embodying
Mm-hmm.
experience, which, you know, I can see, you know, most people, including people who are putting podcasts together, such as yours, have experienced that. But sometimes you have to sort of like analyze every side of the diamond before you see the fun. Eventually, it's really
Mm-hmm.
just one big diamond, but sometimes you have to dissect every side of things on your way to getting there, if it's helpful, you know, to understand. So that's what the book I try to do in the book is explain all these different perspectives of ultimately how you trace the path back to within
Mm-hmm.
across a variety of scenarios. And because if we're all doing that, and we're all acting from a place of light and peace and inner satisfaction, then we radiate that out and we're creating this ripple effect all around us. And we give people the freedom around us to make those choices as well, which can sometimes look like a boundary. And but we don't, but if we're not taking it personally, because we also understand that that person is beautifully vouching for themselves as well, and we support them in any kind of way, what a great world that would be.
Right.
So
I agree. I
be a lot more
totally agree.
direct.
Yes. Yeah. There's so much in what you said. There's so many good things that, so if you don't mind, do you mind sharing what your meditation practice is? Because I mean, there's such a variety, right? And there's no
Yeah,
right or wrong way to meditate, right? Because some people think, well, I
absolutely
have to
not.
meditate for 30 minutes or, and it can just start with a minute, right? So,
Exactly. It can be, I mean, so you can meditate, you can take a walk and you can
mhm,
just focus on what's around you. And that's one way to do it. When I first started, it was guided meditations, and you know, that was very helpful because you're concentrating on a voice, and so if sometimes your mind goes elsewhere astray, you can be brought back into the moment. Um, and I actually have some free guided meditations if people want to try them out on my website, and I'll send them to you later.
mhm.
Um, but the way I do now, which has been a few years now that I've been doing it, it changes every day. I sort of know what I need. So some days I will just need somewhat of like a conscious nap, is what I like to call it. So I'll just lie down, lights off, face mask on if I feel for it, and just set my timer on my phone and focus on my breath and just allow what needs to come through. And sometimes it's really just resting the mind, because the mind is so, I mean, I look forward to it because for me it's like giving my mind a rest.
Mhm.
And so when that moment comes, I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm going to recharge now. And then, you know, that really helps with sorting out real life when we have all of these like inputs and outputs and things that we need to connect and people we need to talk to. And so it's like a neutralizing reset.
Mm.
And, you know, so there's really other times I put on music and I listen to a song, or other times um, I may still listen to some guided meditations. It depends. There's some really nice ones for sleeping, um, depending on what someone might be going through in life. Um, I would say experiment and try some out. Do you meditate?
I do. I do. I'm not as consistent, but I'm getting better um and it does make a huge difference. And I'll tell you one time recently that it made a really big difference. My husband had a health crisis and he was in the hospital, and it was a huge trigger for me. Huge. I mean, it's stressful anyway. And then for
Mhm.
me, it was on top of that, I had trigger. And I just remember how I felt because I hadn't felt like that in so many years. And so I was very present with how I was feeling, and I was feeling completely buzzed, and I couldn't sit still. I was walking around, my mind was going. And of course, my mind was going to worst case scenarios, which was pure
Mhm.
torture. So it was just this vicious cycle. And I, I was completely aware of it. And I just thought, I can't do this because I'm going to drive myself crazy. It was one of those times where I call it, I wanted to crawl out of my own skin and get away from myself because it was too
Yeah.
much. I was overwhelmed. I was absolutely overwhelmed. I
Mm-hmm.
thought, okay. And there is a meditation app that I use. And I just went to a 20-minute one. I thought, I'm laying in bed and I'm going to do this. And
Mm-hmm.
within literally, I worked really hard focusing on listening to the meditation and getting away from the thoughts. And within 5 minutes, I was completely relaxed. That it's just like a buzz that was in my body. That's all I could say. It was just this buzz
Mm-hmm.
that I wanted to get away from was gone and settled down. My breathing was better. The tightness that I had, because I tightened up, I was calming down. My thoughts were settling down. And once I got myself to the point of calming down, I was able then to switch and go, I'm not going to focus on worst case scenario. I'm going to focus on what I want this to look like. And that sounds crazy,
No,
but I'm
it's absolutely.
telling you, it was a game changer for me. Absolute game changer. I was able to sleep that night. I was able to focus the next day and deal with the things that I needed to deal with. And I wasn't overwhelmed anymore.
That's beautiful. Yeah, you transformed your energy.
Mm-hmm.
You turned that, whatever was going on,
Yeah.
that worrying density that was taking place and kind of overtaking you, and you literally transmuted it. Um and and that has an impact also on a subtle level on, what could, manifest around, because if
Mm-hmm.
we're stuck in this negative loop of thinking, then we're, in a way, like, we're just vibrating in such a way that it's not so good for, potentially, like,
Mm-mm.
the others around us and the environment. And, so instead, if we it's beautiful that you were able to transform that into, okay, well, I can choose. So if I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to choose, I'm just going to feel good now and hope for the best and send positive intention and send, great vibes around, and do what I can on my part energetically to create a great outcome from this.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's absolutely one of the best times to meditate. If, if a person doesn't necessarily resonate with doing it every day with a practice,
Mm-hmm.
at the very least, remembering that it's there for you when you have a moment of acute overthinking or worrying or anxiety. It's absolutely really, really impactful. It
It's
helps so many different areas in life, that it
it's
just, yeah.
empowering. It's really empowering because I'll tell you what was going on in my mind too is I was feeling helpless. I was feeling like I don't know what to do. Like I don't want to feel like this. I just felt helpless. And once I went, oh, let me try this. And
Mm-hmm.
once it worked, it was so empowering. And I
Yeah,
wasn't
because
helpless
you did
anymore.
that.
Right.
You did that. and
Mm-hmm.
and that's and that also is another link to add to the, to all the things that contribute towards having that great relationship with yourself, because when you feel empowered, that all you need is yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and all you need is to connect and do this, this meditation, or anything else that comes along, um then very little rattles you eventually.
Right. Right. I mean, and the truth is, our healing and or our growing journey, they're all custom, right? I mean, everybody, there's not one set way to do it. We all have had our stuff that has happened in life, but the one true thing is definitely meditation will help bring you down. I am an overthinker,
Mm-hmm.
a huge overthinker, and I have learned some tips
Same.
and yeah, a lot of people
I
are,
wrote a
and
book.
yeah, yeah.
No, I'm kidding. The book doesn't have overthinking, but I mean, there's a
it's
lot
a
of work there.
common it's a common
Yeah.
problem, and I didn't know I was an overthinker, right?
Hmm.
And I think part of it's because I'm a bit analytical, and then it comes also from my childhood abuse, but it's empowering to go, oh, okay, I'm overthinking this and I don't have to do this. And
Hmm.
I learned a trick the other day, and this is really powerful, and it was one question that will stop your overthinking. And you can close your eyes or not, it doesn't matter. But the next question you should ask yourself is, I wonder what I'm going to think next.
Oh, that's interesting. That's disruptive.
And my mind goes blank. It works on me.
Yeah.
I tested out on a few people because I saw it as a hack on TikTok, right? I'm like, okay, well, let's see if this works. And it worked for me. And I'm like, okay, tried it on my husband. It works for him. And I've tried it on a couple other people. I'm like, oh my gosh, it works. So at least stops that moment of that cycle that you get into. I wonder
It's
what
kind
I'm
of
going to
like
think
reverse.
next.
It's like reverse psychology. I don't know. It's like playing, reverse psychology on your mind,
Right,
which
right.
is
So it's empowering. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, ask yourself, I wonder what I'm going to think next.
yeah,
Try it, right?
exactly. Surprise me. Show me what else we got. Like, how can this go? No, it's so true. And
Yeah.
sometimes overthinking, if you just make the positive thoughts, then okay, like that's great. You can think positive things.
Sure.
Ideally not so many, but and not in an obsessive way either. But
Right. Right.
sometimes an active mind just means that we have a lot that we want to accomplish. We need to get it out. We need to transform it, transmute it, because energy is never created or destroyed. So even those thoughts that are trying, or that activity that's taking place in the mind, whether it has a place in becoming calmness or a place in becoming action or a place in,
right.
Any of these things, it's certainly not beneficial because it makes us feel anxious, but if we can transform it, then why not? So I actually like to sometimes sing if I'm alone. I mean, it's a little weird in public, but if I am, if I'm in my house and I catch myself, it's also very powerful to use the singing vibration. So, just humming a tune and getting ourselves out of it. Yeah, humming. I make up little songs and just kind of
dancing
is great release as well.
Yeah.
Really, really nice to get, that release out of the body and like make space for something. And so any of these techniques are wonderful. And it's all about trial and, I wouldn't even say error, but it's trial and decision. So
right.
Do I like this? If I do, then clearly I'll do it again. And, why not? This works for me.
Right.
And so definitely dancing is one of the most freeing things that we can do, and just letting go and not caring what anybody thinks. And really, really
do it at
really,
home alone.
Yeah.
I'll dance through the house. I do. I go nuts.
Absolutely.
Hopefully none of my neighbors are looking in.
No, I'm the same. I was actually studying for my MBA, and one of the classes, the professor gave us an assignment, and he was like, have an experience with yourself for a few hours and then write about it. And most people were like, yeah, but one person was like, I went to the restaurant alone. And then someone else was like, I went wine tasting or whatever. I went to the movies. And I didn't plan for this, but this spontaneous evening, I was home alone. I had a roommate at the time, and I just danced for 4 hours. And I was like, I guess I'll write about that. And because it was just like, it was my first, it was very early on, and I was not even necessarily awakened yet, if we can call it that. But something intuitively drove me to do this. And for 4 hours, I mean, I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like, it was funny, different dance moves, and just
a lot of release.
Nobody was there, just releasing. Me and my dogs. It was one of the best nights of our lives. I hope for them too.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure they loved it. No doubt. I dance with my dog too.
Yeah, they're so fun.
Yeah.
So, keeping the vibration high is always a good way.
Yeah. And we were talking about being overwhelmed and stuff. And it's easy when we're talking about this stuff to go, oh gosh, should I try this? Just try one thing. Don't allow yourself to get overwhelmed. If that works, great. If it doesn't, move on to the next. There's no wrong answer. It's what works for you. Again, we're all different. We all have different needs. And so it's not wrong.
Exactly.
Not wrong.
What I will say, the key being to try something with yourself. So something that leads you towards feeling the sensation of empowerment, or giving it a try, so that at the end of it, you're left with that feeling that, okay, I brought myself a little bit closer. And what I mean by this is, I'm thinking about, very often we have a problem or we're stressed, and, it can be helpful to call a friend. It's really nice to know. I mean, we are communal beings. We need support and we need friends. but I wouldn't say it's so helpful in the long term, to always rely on someone else to bring us up or to take us out of a situation. That
Right.
can help that particular situation. But if we can, as you did in your situation, find a tool that can bring relief or peace or satisfaction or any of those things, um, that's where the growth can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's more about transforming. If we talk it over, it stays on the mental level. And when it's just on the mental level, it's not going deeper and transforming something. So
Yeah, I have found too, sometimes when you talk about stuff and there's not action, it puts you in a
mhm,
bad place. It does me. It's like when I
mhm,
used to complain about, let's say, my ex-husband, right? I would complain about him. I didn't do that a lot with other people. When I did, it just put me in this really bad place. And there was no
yeah.
resolution. I just talked about it and I just relived it and I'm frustrated and there's no resolution.
Yes, absolutely. You're just bringing in that energy,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no reason to, um, after a certain point. Sometimes we do need to vent. Of course, we're human.
Right.
But when you realize, okay, ultimately, who's going to win here if I just keep talking about this?
Right.
Is there really something it's going to help me with? So that's, yeah. So, talking things over, it's nice. We have voices. We're human beings. We use words. We explain things. But we also have these, our bodies, and we have the ability to calm ourselves and to relieve and just create these experiences that are extremely empowering,
Mm-hmm.
um, and prevent more of the overthinking, or if the overthinking happens, prevent judgment. And so it's like a positive ripple effect into
Mm-hmm.
all of our other practices in life.
Yeah, it is very freeing to be able to know that if I get myself in, I probably will get into a situation where I'm in that place again where it's kind of scary. I mean, life happens, right? But it's empowering to know I don't have to stay there, because it was a really bad place. And
Mhm,
I'm empowered, and there is something I can do to change that and get
mhm,
myself in a much better place so that I can be healthy for my husband, healthy for those that need me.
mhm,
Right.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's another thing in your book. I mean, of course, we're talking about relationships. So we can kind of talk real quick about, relationships with others. And one of the
Mhm,
things that you bring up is vulnerability,
mm,
right? I like
yes.
what you wrote in your book. I'm gonna read it too. It is good to be strong, but strength doesn't get enough credit and tends to be underdefined. Strength is more than the ability to withstand suffering, which I love, or to be able to lift heavy furniture. The highest form of strength is when we are able to open our hearts and share our most profound feelings, even fear, without laying them on another person to solve for us.
Mhm, mhm,
I love that because we do that. And I when I was reading that, I was like, oh, I so used to do that.
mhm,
I so used to put it on other people to fix
mhm.
because I had the
Yeah, and
victim
you're not
mindset.
exactly, but and also we tend to shield the full truth, so our ego kind of um prevents us from really fully opening up. And I had kind of a spicy example in the book, but I think it illustrates it in a way that people could relate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so my example was basically, say you have two people have just gotten to know each other and they've just had relations, and somehow it wasn't the experience that they both expected, and they liked each other, and it was like really, it started off really well, hot and heavy, it's going to be a great night finally, and then it happens and it's not, it's less than stellar. And being vulnerable, so being honest is kind of like saying, okay, well, it wasn't my best night, so let's be
Mm-hmm.
honest, like we can do
Yeah.
better than that. And and that can create like feelings of insecurity, and things that it still blocks the communication. Vulnerability is saying, you know I really like you, and I was so nervous about this night,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, like, I'm just glad that, you know, we can talk about these things. And, you know, I really hope that, you know, if we talk and we can make it better. So it's like showing, it's sharing, it's not putting on them. So it's not blaming them like, hey, like, I don't know what happened with you because like somehow it didn't last. And like, you know, it's not my fault. Like, but being vulnerable is like, you know, I was really nervous. I wasn't even in the moment very much myself. I was, you know, really looking forward to this. And, you know, so that's vulnerability in a way, you know, in one
It
example.
is, because
It's
you don't know how he's going to respond back to you when you're saying that.
right, it's putting it on yourself because
It
it takes
is.
hands to clap. So in this situation, you know, being aware that we're always emitting energy, and we're always, you know, two people are responsible for whatever dynamic is created between the two of them. It's never you do this and I do this. It's like, okay, together we are influencing each other to have this flow of dynamic. And sometimes it's really nice and sometimes it's not in accordance. And communication is sort of like what allows for it to flourish and change if it needs to. Yeah. So that's how you're not putting it on yourself or on the other person. You're
Right.
taking ownership for something you're sharing, or you know, just simply saying, you know, you are such a great person, and you know, I feel a little bit intimidated because you know, you're a tough act to follow, and you know, I admire you so much. And you know, sharing that, or letting someone know like, hey, it's like the first time I'm doing a TED talk, like I'm not really used to this, or for example, things like that. That creates that is also strength. You know, when done with also with honesty. So
Yeah. So how does the person handle it if they are vulnerable and it's not reciprocated? I mean, it's not embraced by the other person, which does happen, right? And that kept me for years from being vulnerable, for years, because I constantly thought, if I let that guard down, I'm going to get hurt, because I was. Right. And I didn't know how to not make it me. You know what I mean?
That's why
like it was my fault.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you never want to do it again, because it's like, I share that side of myself, which is, you know, unfortunate because it's the most beautiful side. You know, that's what makes us beautiful, is when we can explore consciously dark places and be loved for them unconditionally. And it all comes back to your relationship with yourself. It really does, because if you are strong in that, and there's no end goal, right? It's not like, ding, the toast is ready. Like, I have finally built a great relationship with myself, and now I am, you know, shielded from all the pains of life. It's a constant. We're disciples of life, and we're always, top of one mountain is bottom of the next. So we're always going to be tested. But the difference is we have this compounded interest of experience after experience. Once we continue to, you know, pour our cup just a little bit more, I love myself a little bit more, I'm more connected, I'm making all these choices, I'm kind to myself, everything adds up till one day, yes, you're vulnerable, but one day you can realize, okay, that's on them. This is their story, this is their reaction. Like, poor person that they, you know, that they're still so locked behind their own safeguarding that they're unable to, you know, receive this as, you know, as me sharing something beautiful. And you know, that's why it all kind of comes in together this way. And
it really
that's
comes down
now
the
you're able to
foundation.
be vulnerable again, probably because, you know, when you are strong again with yourself, then you can say things and not expect others to react in a certain way either.
Right. I mean, it really does come down to your foundation, which is yourself, and strengthening that, because I think about my reaction now to being vulnerable. And I am vulnerable on this podcast because I'm sharing stories that I have never shared with anybody. And as I begin to share them, of course, there's a little check in me going, don't go there. Don't share that. And then I think, no, because it could help somebody else. And it's
Yeah.
just my story. It's just what happened. I have been able to take that sting out of it's not me. It's,
Mm-hmm.
It's separating who I am from what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I am human, and it's really freeing. It is absolutely freeing. And I still get a check in my heart when I go to tell a vulnerable story, and one that I've never shared, but I know that it's going to help others. And it's not my identity. It's not who I am. It's just a story.
Exactly.
It's just a story.
Exactly. Absolutely. And that's the idea, is when you move away from identifying yourself with the external, and these stories become just stories. They
Mm-hmm.
become building blocks for our awareness and for the realization of who we are today. And they served their purpose in our lives. And if they can serve a purpose of letting other people understand how a situation can affect them, and that it's okay to feel certain types of ways when you're in a moment where you need to hear that, then that's a beautiful purpose for those stories, again, to continue. But yeah, we are not those, we are not our past, we are not our our parents, we are not our whoever we look like in the family. We are ourselves, and we
Mm-hmm.
can even be different than we were yesterday. We can change that every day, um as long as we feel like we're in our heart and we're following a connected path within that's closest to what we need to be happy. um that's beautiful. So
Yeah, one of the things that and I hope this makes sense, so that I found about learning about myself and is the deconstructing I'm doing in my life
mm,
of a lot of things, a lot of things from the abuse, but just some of the belief systems that I had, some of the way I've done things. I'm really going in and looking at them and going, does that really work for me?
mm,
And
mm-hmm,
that's new, because before I was just doing stuff automatically because it's just what I knew. It's just what I was
mm-hmm.
taught. It was how I was raised, or, how I thought it should go. And now I'm learning to slow down and look at these things and see if they even work for me, and deconstructing them.
Yeah, absolutely. And what have you found that maybe in the past, like what is one of the things that you'd say surprised you the most that you were doing on autopilot before that today?
Let me think. So a lot of it comes from my religious background.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to think. I was just, I can't think of one thing, but what I can tell you an example of kind of is, I had one coach tell me one time, it was really the only kind of smart thing that he ever said to me,
Well, that's
was,
worth it.
you see things black and white. You need to start looking at things in color.
Mm,
And
okay.
I went, oh, and I knew I looked at things black and white, but I didn't know there was another way
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
until he said that. And so that has been the thing that I've been using as stuff comes up in me. And I can't think of an example right now exactly, but that's what I compare it to. Do I want to keep doing that the same way? Is there a different way that I can do that will work better for me or for my family or whatever? I wish I
Mm-hmm.
could come up with an example right now, but I can't. I'm not always real quick that way. But that has been key for me. Stop looking at things black and white. Look at things in color.
I love that. I love that even more than, the gray, how everybody, how
Mm-hmm.
often people will say it's not black and white, it's gray. But when you say the colors, I immediately start thinking about like a color palette of
Yes.
so many different,
There's
markers or crayons.
such a variety of colors,
Yeah, which
right?
gives room to so many solutions that can all have their own beautiful, vibrant essence,
And
can
you can
be,
even mix colors and make a
yeah,
new color, right?
yeah, and
So, I
create
mean,
a paradox with more than one truth existing.
exactly. And that was mind opening for me, because I was very black and white, and part of it was kind of who I am. Part of it is, I was very deeply into religion for a long time, and it can be very black and white. And not saying anything negative about that. I have a great relationship with God. It's just, for me, it just was too much. It was too black and white. And so even things like adding color literally in my house that I would never do before. Oh no, it has to be subtle. I was also someone that thought I had to stay under the radar. And I kept hearing for years, you're going to come out from under the radar. Well, here we are. I'm now out from under the radar because I was never out from under the radar. I made sure I stayed under.
Color.
Exactly. And I'm adding color. Yes, I am all about colors. So, yeah.
But that's true. And that's what you just said right now is exactly, I think, one of the things that block a lot of people, including myself in my own story, is we get locked in these beliefs like, this is who I am. And the good and the bad, right? So we're like, oh yeah, I am like this, and then this bothers me. And so then if everybody else doesn't understand this particular sensibility about myself or sensitivity, then it's their problem. But no, like, first of all, we are not our struggles. We are not these things. These things can be worked through. Right. And most of them get ironed out again by just continuing on this path of discovery, of discovering how to have, how to bring more love into ourselves and others, and approaching things from a perspective of looking at things in color. And when you change the way you see things, and when you rearrange them, then things rearrange around you as well.
That is so true. Just like what you said earlier, why is this happening to me instead of why is this happening for me? Like, how does that make you feel when you think about, oh, this is happening to me again, instead of saying, wait a minute, this is happening for me again. Why?
Exactly.
You are empowered. The other way, you're disempowered. You're just a victim of your circumstance, which is exactly what I used to do for years. I full on had the victim mindset. And it's so interesting because I think back on it and I can think, like, in the back of my head, the mindset that I had was, I've been a victim of childhood abuse and you all have to support me and you all have to understand, and I don't do anything wrong. It's your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. Well, I wouldn't do that if you didn't, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Oh boy, that was a bad place to be, let me tell you. And it took me a long time to kind of get to even recognize that and work through that. And it is very freeing knowing that, no, I own my stuff. It doesn't make me a bad person if I make a mistake. It just means I made a mistake.
Exactly.
And I don't spend hours overthinking it.
Correct. And, to your point, it's like when someone is in a victim mindset, it's like, how are they going to help themselves if they don't know that they can help themselves?
Exactly. So you see my dilemma.
It's like, oh my gosh, where do we begin?
Yeah, this is this vicious cycle that how do you get off of it? And I don't know what made me finally realize that. I don't know exactly what it was, but I just remember when I realized that, it was like, wow, that's empowering. It sounds like it wouldn't be when you start owning your stuff, but it is. It's very empowering. And, and like you were saying earlier, I wanted to bring up too, is in communication and communicating with others. And so much is to be said about how you present a message, right? And I say this because back in my victim mode, when I was in that place, and it was never my fault, my messages were not nice, and my messages could be quite vicious. And I used to joke that I could shred my now ex-husband with my tongue. Just, I could be very vicious. Yeah, not nice. And I could just remember when I would be in that place and just how I could hear myself, but I didn't know how to come out of it. And now I pause. I have a big pause, especially if I feel myself triggered, which still happens, right? But I have that pause between my trigger and my reaction, and I take a deep breath and I process it before I respond, because it is all in the delivery of the message.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And when we are triggered, it's our story with ourselves just as much as it is about, even more so than what is representing itself. And I forget the percentage there's I learned this in like a kind of like a speech communication class, like how to give speeches, but it was like a very large part, like maybe like 80% of what we say is the tone, and then like 15% is like the words, and then
Mm-hmm.
like or no, sorry, 80% is actually our demeanor, or and then it's the tone, and then it's the words. So it's like our
Okay.
nonverbal communication as well is really, really important. I'm butchering this theory completely, but the point is the words are, it's really like it's our tone and how we're feeling. And then
Mm-hmm.
because if we can be firm in principle and soft on words,
Yeah.
then that is the most powerful, because when it's if a person is like like shouting, then that unfortunately doesn't have as much impact as someone who's calm and who's saying,
Mm-hmm.
this is doing this to me. I
Mm-hmm.
won't accept it.
Mm-hmm.
uh you know let's talk later, I need some space.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with saying I need space. Absolutely. Sometimes I'm like, I need to go process. I just need a minute. I
Mhm.
need to go process this because what wants to come out of my mouth right now is not very nice.
Yeah, and
And
what will happen is I'll be able to turn this into a constructive building block to our dynamic relationship. And so, yes, please give me the space to go process.
and
And it's a sign of maturity to be able to recognize that instead of becoming reactive, we are intentional with how we communicate. And
mhm.
that's a favor we can do for others. Being able to understand ourselves and you know process these things before, if we know that we're being triggered.
And that's where the conversation could get vulnerable as well, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's
Exactly.
okay.
Yes, and it's like, I mean, lately a lot of I had in relationships, like in romantic relationships, when those are the places, like we can be so far ahead in our we can believe we're so far ahead in our spirituality,
Until
but
we get in a relationship.
it's easy to when you live alone, and like the most
Yeah.
conflict you have is with your plant. But
Yeah.
but then when you're dating a real person, and
Yeah.
really human things come up, and they're not, they're human, it's like, um and I was quite triggered once. I was dating someone, and like they posted a picture with a friend of theirs, but she was like quite dressed up in like a very provocative way, and it was like it
Uh,
didn't look like a friendship photo, is what I was saying. And that really triggered me for so many different reasons. That wasn't this person's fault necessarily. Like, go for it. If there was trust, etc., like that's okay. You want to, you want to make these choices, and that's your identity. And that's on me for making it. I shouldn't worry about that. But what it allowed me to understand was like, wow, like I'm deeply triggered by this particular person because she looks completely different than me. And because, I had to work on a couple of things on myself and my own view of myself, my own self esteem. And at the end of it all, I realized, okay, so I need to love my body. I need to love who I am, my hair color, my cultural background. And once I recognized that this situation was really like a way for me to lock that in,
mm,
at the end of it all, I had my process, like, and, on my end of things by myself, because we weren't in the same country at the time. And at the end of it all, I was like, wow, thank you. Like, I literally was just like, thank you for this situation. Because
mm-hmm.
I would have never
You wouldn't have known.
healed these parts of me from my earlier years where, appearance was important, and
Mm-hmm.
somehow I had locked in these certain beliefs about myself that, in comparison. And and then I forgave myself. The Ho'oponopono is really powerful. I forgive,
Yeah.
thank you, I'm sorry, and I love you. And just, saying, and so,
How
when
freeing
triggering
that was,
situations
right?
arise, it's like it's freeing. You can heal that side of you. And once you've exposed it and neutralized it, it goes
Mm-hmm.
away. Um, and if it comes back a lot milder, and you can recognize it when it comes
Mm-hmm.
through again. And so, today, uh, if I see other people that I'm dating, with female friends that look a certain type of way, that's cool, great. Like, I've already figured this out.
Yeah.
I love myself. So
It's not
we
something
are
that you
good.
have to deal with anymore.
Yeah,
That's what I
it's
mean by
not
so
a,
freeing. Like, you don't have to deal with those emotions again.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
like dealing with those emotions, but I know they need to be done. It's not fun, but it sure feels good when you do work through them and you come out on the other side of it.
Yeah, neutralizing and finding out. And the way you neutralize things is really just understanding their origin. And when did that particular belief create itself in your mind? When did that fear come up in your life? Or when is your earliest memory of that situation happening? And can you take a moment and go within and maybe even have a conversation with the person that you were back then and explain to them really what was going on in that situation, how it wasn't their fault, and how,
Mm-hmm.
this is actually what's taken place. And then you kind of just, once you find out why, you correct it. It's automatic. Once it's understood, then the lesson is gone.
It's so true. As soon as you understand it, there's no power over you anymore.
Exactly.
It's just like, it's just such a release. That's the only way I can put it. It's so
Yeah.
true. Well,
And then eventually you have none of those left, and eventually you're just a happy-go-lucky person.
and you just move on to the next thing.
Exactly.
Exactly.
There's so many other things too. So that's
Well,
the beauty.
I love this conversation, and we could probably go on and on and on about, the relationship that we have with ourselves. Because really, as I said earlier, it is absolutely our foundation, because we are not going to have healthy, loving relationships with anybody else if we don't love ourselves. And I know that to be true for myself. But I also think of people in my life who I love dearly, and I can see in them that they don't love themselves. And it's really hard, but it's got to be their journey. I need to come along and support them and be an example, and hopefully they'll learn from it and impart it into their life as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really the best thing, is to let people have everybody walks their path, and they have
Mm-hmm.
free will and free choice.
It's their
And
journey.
it's their journey. And so, yeah, it's hard not to try to save people,
Yeah,
but
I used to do that.
it happens to everybody. When you have initially on the journey, you're like, come on over, it's nice
Yeah.
here. Like,
Yeah.
you feel good, but they're like, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And people will hear it when they're ready to hear it, and then the information will come to them. So,
Yeah. You just need to love
but
them right where they're at.
being an
Mm-hmm.
example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. This has been really good. You know, I know your whole book is about basically about the different relationships, and we really just touched on one and kind of touched a little bit on relationships with others. I mean, we could probably have a whole nother podcast on having our relationships with others, because I would love to do that, because that's huge.
Oh yeah, it opens up. It opens up into, boundaries and cultural structures and
People pleasing.
pleasing boss relationships, toxic dynamics in the workplace, and then
Oh yeah.
all the fun stuff that happens when we are dating and we're not feeling so good about ourselves. So
Mm,
we deal with like the love bomb, like being able to recognize all of these other moments in the dating world that, um, that can sometimes come up when we don't have yet that inner love. And then, so when we do, how does that look like? And so,
yeah. Yeah. Because I can remember having the mindset that I'll be happy when I'm finally in a relationship. When I finally find that man that will love me, I'll be happy. And it was not.
you have to be happy on your way to being happy.
Ooh, yeah. 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 And that's definitely what happened before I married my current husband. Is I really worked on myself, and really I enjoy my company. I really, truly, I'm not alone. I'm not lonely. I enjoy my time with myself. I have a good time. I make myself laugh. And I have a really great relationship with my husband and with others because of it. I know that's made a huge difference for me.
Yeah. It's the only way
Yeah. Yeah.
to really be happy. It's just the only way.
And fulfilled, really, truly fulfilled
Mm-hmm.
for me.
Fulfilled from the inside out, no matter what is taking place on the external, no
Hmm.
matter what. With a couple of exceptions, I would assume. But whether you're waiting in line at the grocery store or you're sitting at the pool, I mean, if you feel good about yourself, then nothing can really rattle you. You're just existing. You're living. And living is all about experiencing every single thing that's around us and feeling whole inside. So that whatever takes place isn't going to rattle you. And then again, the people around us don't feel any pressure to fill in those gaps of happiness that we have within ourselves. So then whatever is created is just absolutely a bonus. And of course, we're going to have down moments where we can rely on a partner, where we can rely on a friend. That's the beauty of the human existence. We have each other, but not turning it into a dependency.
Right.
Having its own self-regulation, which can, which gives us that solid presence and empowered essence that then can move forward independently in the world.
I agree. So if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do this? I'll have this, of course, listed all down below on the podcast, but let us know how we could reach out to you.
You can go to my website, which is holyshiver.com. And I have a variety. So you can go to holyshiver.com/a-new-banana, and that'll have a link to my book, which is on Amazon anyway. And then I also have my Instagram, which is holy_shiver. And I'll send you the link for the meditations. It's holyshiver.com/get-free-meditations. And those are all designed for anyone just starting out. So there's a lot of voice in the background, some music and some silent moments, but it's very, very concentrated on the messages and on the voice that's speaking. So nice. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on here and us having this great conversation about, having a great relationship with ourselves. And I can't say enough about that. And laughing. I love that you laugh with yourself. That's the best. Oh, I totally laugh at myself. Not about the laughter, but that is the best medicine. I know. I used to be horrified at myself. I used to, I do something silly and I would just spend days beating myself up over it. Now I'm like, it was hilarious. I made people laugh. Whatever. I don't care. Amazing. Yeah, I'm just a goofball now. Yeah, that's the best. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again. Thank you.